This video goes over how to use the servos in Botball. So here are the 4 important pieces of code that you'll need to know. Really 3. I use these first 3 right here, but this 4th one can be helpful in debugging. So the first one is enable servos, and it makes all the servos work. So you have to have that at the beginning of every um, program that you are going to be using the servos in. And the next one is disable servos, and that has to be at the end of every program because it turns off all of the servos, and that's important because that saves the battery life. And the robot battery is not the best, so as much battery as you can save, that's really good. So this set servo position, this piece of code right here is super important and you use it all the time. It takes 2 arguments, as you can see down here. The first argument says which servo port that you're going to be using, and the second argument tells what position that you want to set the servo to. This position is between 0 and 2047. And then the last one right here is get servo position. And then you put which servo you want to get the position of. It returns the last requested servo position. So if you're like um, wanting to do something but wait until a servo gets to a certain point, you can use this because it'll return the position of the servo that you want. So now we're going to go down to the examples. So first I enabled all the servos, so now they're all working and ready to go. And then I set the first servo to a position of 800. I set the second servo to a position of 150. I set the third servo to a position of 2000, almost at the end. And I set the fourth servo to a position of 453. Then I printed the last position of the second servo, which is 150 right here. This is here, you have to have it because it says like what this is supposed to be printing. Yeah, so you have to have that here because this is an integer value, which is just a number, and so you have to have this like this. So if you want to print this, then you can just copy that right there. That'll be really helpful. And then I disabled all the servos so they're not running and using up all the battery and breaking themselves because that's what they'll do. Now, finding servo position. You might know that you can set the servos to any position, but how do you know which position you need to set it to? So first of all, you have to attach the servo to your robot, and then what you have to do is you have to go into set it. You have to go into the brain, and you have to click on the motors and servos tab, and then you have to click on the servos tab. And then it'll bring you to a menu and it'll have servo 0, servo 1, servo 2, and servo 3. And you click on the servo that you want to use. So if you plug in, you have one servo on your robot and you plug it into port 0, you'll click the servo 0 button and then you will click the enable servo button. And then there'll be a dial and you will move that dial around with your finger and it'll move the servo around. And the servo will move to whatever position that you move the dial to. And so you'll need to connect your servo to the robot. And then when you connect, say if you want to have an arm on your robot, then you'll connect the arm to it. And then you move the servo around and it'll show you what position moves the arm to whatever like position that you want it to. So if you want the arm straight up, then you have to move the dial so the arm's straight up, and then you see what position the dial is, and then you can disable that servo because you know what position the arm is at, and you can put that in your code. So if you want to say, okay, let's see here, I want to set servo position of the first servo, which is going to be my arm, and I figured out that the arm is straight up at 700. So then, anytime you want the arm to be straight up, you just call this and it'll set it to 700. Now, the difference between a servo and a motor is that a motor, it goes around and around and around forever. It goes 360 degrees. because that's how wheel would have to work, or else the motor wouldn't work. The servo can only go 180 degrees, and so it only goes halfway around, and then it stops, and then it only stays going 180 degrees. So that leads to servo placement. You have to place the servo in a position, and so wherever you need the servo to go, it has to be able to get there. Because if you have, if you have a little block over here and your servo can't like get there, it can only go up here, um, then you'll have to either move your arm or move the servo. So you want to make sure the servo can get to wherever you're going. So these are the examples right here again, and if you want to look at them, they're really helpful. Say this sets servo 0 to 700. So these are just some examples right here and some documentation for you. So, yep, that's it.